Why did her hand stay steady when everything around her was falling apart? The sound of distant rotors still echoed in her mind, fadding, until all that was left was wind. Cold mountain wind brushing across broken stone. That was how it always began for Brooke Vance, with silence that felt too loud and calm that never lasted. She'd been a sniper for 6 years, but Revenger Valley, that name would burn itself into memory the way scars remember fire. The mission had sounded simple when the orders came down at Fort Kestrel, intel gathering, 3 days in and out, no direct engagement unless compromised. The kind of op meant to go unnoticed, buried beneath the thousand quiet shadows of special operations. But nothing about the valley had felt right from the start. The map made it look small, just another gray line of ridges pressed against a hostile border. But the mountains there were monsters. Sheer walls of rock, narrow trails that swallowed vehicles, villages built from mud and memory. A place where you didn't need to see danger to know it was already watching you. Brooke remembered standing beside the helicopter that night, strapping in her Mk-13 rifle, the metal cold against her palms. The others joked lightly, pretending nerves didn't exist. Commander Ethan Ward checked the manifest for the third time, his expression unreadable, eyes hard as the valley stone they'd soon be landing on. He'd been in the teams for a decade, the kind of leader who'd seen men break and never blamed them for it, only reminded them what came next. Cole Ramirez, breacher, close quarters bruiser, was the last to board. He flashed Brooke a grin through his beard. Another quiet 3 days, right, sniper? She smirked faintly. You say that every time. And every time it's true, he said, though they both knew it was a lie. The rotors thundered overhead. Wind whipped sand and dust into their faces. And then they were lifting into the black void of night, where stars felt close enough to touch and death waited somewhere below, patient. The insertion went clean. No contacts, no comms interference, just 6 SEALs moving through darkness, boots sinking into dust, rifles tight against their shoulders. They hiked 8 kilometers through terrain so unforgiving that even the local militia avoided it. By dawn, they found the shepherd's compound, an old stone structure carved into the slope, half collapsed, half perfect. Brooke had picked it herself from satellite imagery. High ground, overlapping fields of fire, concealment from all but the sky. From there, they watched the valley unfold below them, a sweep of ridges and dry gullies dotted with sparse trees. The air was thin, almost brittle. Every sound traveled far. Every movement risked being seen. But the team worked like a machine. Ward ran point, directing surveillance. Nathan Cho, comms, set up antennas and encryption links, whispering into static as he intercepted enemy transmissions. Jenna Hart, medic and secondary assault, checked everyone's vitals and gear. Ryan Cross charted fallback routes in case they had to run. And Brooke settled behind her rifle, sighting across the valley, breathing with the rhythm of the land itself. Through her scope the world narrowed. A village a mile away, 2 guards packing by a shed, smoke from morning fires rising like ghost signals. Everything was slow, methodical, and for a while perfect. But perfection never lasts long in places like this. The first sign came on the second night. Faint static on Cho's headset. A fragment of encrypted chatter, foreign language, heavily coded but with one unmistakable phrase. Coordinates. Their coordinates. He replayed it twice before saying a word. When he finally did, his voice had that tightness only fear could cause. They know we're here, he said. No one spoke, just the sound of wind against stone. Commander Ward's face hardened. How? Unknown, but multiple units are converging. They're moving fast. Ward didn't hesitate. He was already packing, already running through fallback points. We move northeast. Alternate pickup zone, 8 clicks. Go light, leave what we don't need. But Brooke saw Ramirez stop at the lookout above, his silhouette sharp against the dying light. He had binoculars to his eyes. Contact, he said. Multiple trucks inbound, south side, 20+ fighters. They're armed and moving straight for us. It happened that fast, 20 becoming 30, 30 becoming 50. Dust clouds forming along the ridgelines. Pickup trucks. Men dismounting with rifles and RPGs slung across their backs. Brooke's stomach sank. Not fear, calculation. The way a sniper's mind works when every second decides survival. 60 against 6. The math didn't need explaining. Ward gave the only order he could. "We hold here. Cho, get me CAS. Air support now." "Negative," Cho answered, scanning frequencies. "All Apache are on tasking. 40 minutes minimum." 40 minutes against 60 men. Brooke chambered around and climbed to the high perch, a narrow platform above the compound where the wind screamed and visibility stretched to 800 meters. Her rifle felt heavy but alive. She ran through every detail, range estimations, wind direction, angles of cover. Her heartbeat slowed until it matched the tempo she'd drilled 1,000 times. Below, the team fortified the stone compound. Frag grenades stacked near choke points, entryways reinforced, ammo distributed. "Let them come," Ramirez muttered, sliding into position by a window. Brooke didn't answer. She was already sighting the tree line to the south. Through the glass of her Schmidt and Bender scope, the world shrank to a single heartbeat of clarity. Movement. Figures dismounting. The first wave. "Southern contact, 600 meters," she whispered into comms. 25 fighters, setting up an assault by fire. "Copy," Ward replied. "Weapons free. Break their will before they commit." She adjusted the dial for distance. One breath, one half exhale, one trigger press. The first man fell before he even knew he'd been seen. A clean shot straight through the chest. The second, a PKM gunner setting up behind a rock, never touched the trigger. She didn't feel triumph, only focus. That steady rhythm that turned fear into function. Below, gunfire erupted. The militants, disoriented by invisible death, fired wildly into the hills. Bullets cracked against stone, whining into the night. None found her. None could. "South element in chaos," she reported, switching west. Her rifle swung smoothly. Through jagged terrain, shadows moved, 15, maybe 20 fighters creeping low. She caught one mid-sprint. The bullet met him before his next step. Another raised an RPG. She dropped him before he could aim. "West group closing," she called. "Copy," Ward's voice answered, clipped. "Cole, hold west gate. Jenna, cover north window." The compound's walls shook under gunfire. The team's rifles answered in measured bursts, precise, surgical. They weren't fighting for glory now. They were fighting for minutes. Brooke shifted again, north this time. A third group, disciplined, deliberate, moving through a ravine. Harder to see, harder to hit. She waited, patient as stone, until one exposed his shoulder. The reticle settled. Another fell. Another followed. "They're pinned," she whispered, 250 meters out. For a moment, it almost felt like control. But control, like calm, never lasts. Nathan Cho's voice came sharp through comms. "More trucks arriving. South side again. Reinforcements." "How many?" "Too many." Brooke's breath caught. The valley below was crawling, new shapes, new muzzle flashes. At least 70 now, the odds tightening like a noose. "Targeting technical," she said, dialing to 650 meters. The truck's engine block filled her scope. 3 quick rounds, sparks, smoke. The machine coughed and died. One less threat for now. "Truck neutralized," she said, "but they're learning, using better cover." "Keep pressure," Ward replied. "CAS in 20. Bullets slammed into the stone near her. Chips of rock peppered her face. She wiped blood from a small cut on her cheek, blinked through grit, stayed steady. Fear wanted to speak, she refused to listen. Then came the sound she hated most, the M4s below switching to rapid fire. Close contact, too close. "West side," Cross shouted. "They're trying to flank." Brooke swung her rifle but couldn't see the angle. The blind zone. She heard grenades go off, shouts. Then silence, then gunfire again. Flank repelled, Ramirez gasped over comms. Two down, we're good. Brooks' finger tightened on the trigger again. One more shot, then another. Each target fell, each second stolen from the impossible clock. But even as she fought, part of her wondered something she'd never said aloud. Why was she so calm? Why, when everything screamed chaos, did she feel still? The answer came in pieces. Maybe it was training, maybe instinct. Or maybe it was something deeper, the quiet realization that panic served no purpose and fear never changed outcomes. You either made the shot or you didn't. You either held or you broke. And she wasn't breaking tonight. The sun dipped behind the ridgeline. Shadows stretched long and merciless. The militants stopped pushing. They were waiting for darkness, for the chance to move unseen. Be advised, Brooke transmitted softly. They'll hit hard once light's gone. Then we hold harder, Ward said. His voice was tired now, but firm. Make the next 20 minutes count. Brooke watched the horizon fade. The valley turned from gold to gray to black. Wind rose through the cliffs, and somewhere out there, dozens of men prepared to die without knowing it. She took a long, slow breath, adjusted her rifle one more time, and whispered to herself, not prayer, not fear, just truth. Numbers don't matter. Only skill. Only will. Only the refusal to surrender. How long could one heartbeat hold back an army? That's what Brooke wondered as night swallowed Revenger Valley. The sun had fallen behind the ridges, and in its absence the world shrank to sound, dry leaves scraping stone, the low hum of tension carried by wind, the click of a safety released somewhere far below. Even the stars seemed to hesitate, hiding behind thin veils of cloud. Inside the compound, the air was thick with anticipation, the kind of silence that comes right before something terrible. Brooke felt it in her bones, that animal instinct that always knew when the next storm was seconds away. Through her scope, the valley was darkness punctured by faint movement. She adjusted the reticle illumination, soft red glow, barely enough to see shapes but enough to end them. Every few seconds her finger brushed the trigger, not firing, just feeling it. A quiet reminder that when the world collapsed, this was what she could control. Below, Commander Ward crouched by the central wall, radio pressed against his ear. CAS in 15, Cho reported. They're en route, ETA still green. Ward's jaw tightened. 15 minutes, he murmured. We need to stay alive that long. Ramirez checked his last frag grenade. Cross reloaded his M4 with the slow precision of someone who'd done it too many times. Jenna Hart's hands moved methodically across her medkit, laying out tourniquets, gauze, morphine, not because she expected to need them, but because she knew she would. Brooke's voice came through softly in their earpieces. Movement south, 50 meters forward of the tree line. They're forming up. Ward nodded, though she couldn't see it. Confirmed visual. Confirmed it's their main push. The faint metallic sound of bolts sliding back echoed from below. Safety catches off. Every operator waiting for a signal that might never come. Brooke breathed deep, in, hold, exhale. The same rhythm drilled into her on sniper ranges. The same rhythm that steadied her heartbeat when fear tried to take over. Then came the first flash. A burst of gunfire erupted from the southern slope, wild at first, then coordinated. Tracer rounds streaked through darkness like falling stars, slamming into the compound walls. Dirt and stone exploded outward. The air turned to thunder. They're firing blind, Ramirez shouted, using the gunfire to cover movement. Copy, Ward barked. Brooke, counter-suppress. She didn't need telling twice. Her rifle cracked, the suppressed thunder rolling through the night, barely a whisper compared to the chaos below. She took the gunners first. Every muzzle flash was a beacon, every mistake a death sentence. One fell, then another, then another. Through her scope, the valley looked like a dying constellation. Bursts of orange light snuffed out one by one. Targets down, she said quietly. They're falling back for cover. But even as she spoke, movement flickered at her periphery. North, a second group emerging from the ravine. Multiple contacts north side, she snapped. 15 to 20 closing distance fast. I've got them, Cole shouted. He opened fire from the lower window, bursts of precise 3-round control. Brooke swung her scope that direction, saw shadows moving low through brush, closing within 200 meters. She exhaled, adjusted, fired. One hit. Another. A third caught mid-sprint, folded silently. Each shot was a decision. Each trigger pull, a thread between life and loss. But there were too many. They kept coming. For every man she dropped, 2 more appeared. She could feel their confidence building, believing the numbers were theirs. Ward's voice crackled over comms. All stations maintain sectors. We hold until air is on station. Cho's tone was grim. 10 minutes, sir. 10 minutes. That was eternity measured in heartbeats. Brooke sighted down again, scanning for leadership movement. There, a figure pointing, shouting commands. She squeezed off a round. He dropped instantly. Leader down, south element disrupted, she reported. Copy that, Ward replied, voice steady but strained. The militants faltered, but the momentum didn't die. Instead, they shifted, smarter this time, spreading wider, advancing in bounding teams. Brooke tracked each movement, her rifle dancing from sector to sector, like a conductor orchestrating death. For a moment she caught her reflection in the scope's faint glare, her own eyes calm, detached, almost ghost-like. It unsettled her. She once wondered if killing changed a person. 6 years in, she knew the answer. It didn't change you all at once. It hollowed you piece by piece, quietly, until silence started to sound too much like home. West side taking heavy, Cross yelled. Multiple flanking groups. Brooke pivoted instantly, but the terrain blocked her view. She could hear the gunfire, though, sharp, desperate, echoing through stone corridors. Ramirez's deep voice cut through. Holding West, 2 down, we're good. Brooke wanted to believe him, but she heard the tremor in his breathing, exhaustion creeping in. She turned her scope back to the south. The militants were repositioning again, using darkness now, flashes of movement between tree trunks, harder targets, smarter ones. She adjusted elevation, focused through the red-lit glass. Each shot was slower now, measured, deliberate. She wasn't just fighting the enemy anymore, she was fighting the creeping fatigue in her own arms, the tremor beginning in her fingers, the sting of sweat and smoke in her eyes. Status Vance, Ward asked. Still effective, she answered. Rounds expended about 40. She had 80 left, maybe. Make them count, Ward said quietly. And then the radio static hissed, Cho's voice urgent. Be advised, more signatures approaching from the west. Looks like reinforcements. We're up to 70 plus. 70. Brooke's jaw clenched. She sighted south again, catching sight of headlights flickering through treetops. More trucks, more fighters. The compound was a glowing target now, their muzzle flashes visible miles away. Her mind ran through math again. Wind, angle, distance. But underneath all the calculation, something human flickered, a thought she couldn't suppress. We're not getting out of this. She buried it. There was no room for doubt. Her next shot dropped a man carrying a radio. Another bullet shattered the hand of someone reaching for an RPG. Each impact bought them seconds. Seconds they could turn into survival. Below, Ramirez's voice came again, rough and low. They're regrouping. Looks like they're getting ready for a push. Ward moved to the wall beside him, firing short bursts. Hold the line. Jenna Hart knelt beside Cross, checking his arm, blood streaking down his sleeve. You're hit. Just a graze, he muttered, teeth clenched. Keep firing. Cho called out coordinates again, marking for the incoming jets. His voice was calm, almost eerily so. CAS 5 minutes out. We just have to hold 5 more. 5 minutes. Brooke locked back in, scanning the ravine. Through her scope, she saw figures lining up, the northern assault preparing to charge. 15, maybe more. They were tired, desperate, and dangerous. "Movement north," she warned. "Final approach." "Copy," Ward said. "Everyone ready." The militants screamed as they charged. It was chaos, shouts, gunfire, the pounding of boots against rock. They were only 200 meters out when Brooke opened fire. One down. Another. A third spun sideways, collapsing mid-scream. Her rifle became rhythm. Shot, breath, reload, adjust, fire. Every squeeze of the trigger pushed the enemy farther from hope, but the waves didn't stop. At 150 meters, she could see their faces, eyes wide, teeth bared, the raw madness of belief that numbers would save them. But they didn't understand the math of precision. "Hold your fire till they're close," Ward ordered from below. The compound lit up again. M4s roared, grenades boomed, the air filled with dust and flame. Brooke fired until the bolt locked back. She reloaded without looking, hands moving from muscle memory. The magazine clicked in. She sighted again, only to find fewer targets standing. The northern group was broken, the survivors crawling back into the ravine. "North clear," she shouted. "Copy," Ward answered. "South still active." Brooke pivoted again, scanning. Her breath hitched. The southern tree line was alive with muzzle flashes, the final wave, easily 30 strong. They were rushing forward in desperation, trying to overwhelm before air arrived. "Engaging south," she yelled. Her shots came fast, too fast. One hit, another missed, another hit again. But the line kept coming. 2 minutes, Cho cried over the radio. Brooke shifted to the heaviest concentration, the machine gun crew laying down suppressive fire. She squeezed once. The gunner dropped. Another man took his place. She fired again. The barrel fell silent. Then the sound she'd been waiting for. Distant thunder, jet engines. Ward heard it too, CAS inbound. Brooke exhaled once, a sound between relief and exhaustion, and switched her focus to target marking. Laser on, tree line 600 south, ridge 400 west. Cho relayed quickly. Viper 2-1, ground team marking targets, danger close. Copy, Viper 2-1, the pilot's voice came back. Visual on laser, weapons hot. Brooke watched through her scope as 2 streaks of light cut across the night sky, then impact. The world exploded. The tree line disintegrated under fire and smoke. Shockwaves rippled through the valley. Secondary blasts from munitions erupted like miniature suns. The ridge went next, another strike, another storm of dust and debris. Even from her perch, she felt the ground shake. When it ended, silence returned, the kind of silence that only follows destruction. Ward's voice came soft over comms. "All stations, hold fire, assess." Brooke scanned through her scope. No organized movement, no muzzle flashes, just chaos, bodies, smoke, wreckage. "South clear," she whispered. "West clear, no hostiles visible." Ward nodded slowly. "Copy that." Ramirez sank against the wall, breathing heavy. Cross slumped beside him, blood still seeping through his sleeve. Jenna checked everyone, eyes burning from smoke and adrenaline. Cho leaned against the radio, whispering final confirmations to the jets. Brooke stayed where she was, rifle still shouldered, cheek pressed to stock just in case. Through her scope, the valley looked almost peaceful again. The stars had returned. The wind sounded like itself, but her body refused to relax. She'd been living in survival mode so long that peace felt foreign. Down below, Ward's voice broke through again, softer now. "Hell of a job, Vance. You just bought us our lives." Brooke didn't answer right away. She just stared through the glass, watching smoke curl above the tree line. Bought wasn't the word she'd use. Because nothing about survival felt like a purchase. It felt like a cost. And the bill always came later. Why did silence always come after victory? And why did it feel so heavy? Smoke drifted across the valley, carried by the cold mountain air. What had been a battlefield minutes ago was now just wreckage, scattered rifles, twisted metal, small fires burning themselves out among broken trees. Brooke's rifle lay across her knees, barrel cooling, scope still faintly glowing. She hadn't moved since the last shot. Her hands were steady but not calm. Her breath came slow, deliberate, as if her body was trying to catch up to the fact that it was still alive. The others moved below, shadows among shadows. Ward checked their perimeter one last time, his steps cautious but sure. Ramirez sat against a wall, cleaning his weapon mechanically, eyes blank. Jenna tended to Ryan Cross's arm. The wound was shallow but angry, a reminder that luck had played its part too. Cho was already reconfiguring his comms, trying to reach command for extraction clearance. No one spoke, not at first. The quiet was sacred, the kind that demanded respect. Brooke finally pulled back from her scope. Her neck ached, her eyes burned, but she stayed seated, staring into the blackened tree line where she'd watched dozens of men fall. She counted their faces in her mind without wanting to. Faces she'd seen for half seconds through magnification, one pulling a trigger, another yelling orders, another just running. For them it had been war. For her it had been arithmetic, distance, wind, breath, trigger, result. A simple process. Until the shooting stopped. Ward's voice broke the quiet. Status. Ramirez exhaled, wiping grime from his face. We're clear, no contact, no movement. Ammo. Low, Cross said, but enough to get us out. Ward nodded once, then looked toward the ridge. Vance. She looked down at him, blinking once. Still eyes on. Yeah, she answered softly, nothing moving. Good, stay that way a little longer. I don't trust quiet valleys. He was right not to. Quiet could be a lie. Brooke raised the rifle again, scanning through her scope one more time. The valley stretched endlessly, shapes of bodies half hidden by grass, glints of metal reflecting moonlight, smoldering wreckage from the strikes. Nothing stirred. But her gut still whispered not yet. Then she heard it faint like a cough carried on wind. A voice. 2, maybe 3. Survivors. She focused, adjusted magnification. South tree line 700 meters out. 2 men dragging a third. Wounded, disoriented, heading toward the trucks that hadn't been obliterated. Movement south, she said quietly. 3 hostiles attempting to retreat. Ward's answer was immediate. Engage if they're armed. She hesitated only for a moment. Through the scope, she could see one of them limping, his leg dark with blood. Another carried a rifle but wasn't aiming it. The third looked barely conscious. For the first time in the entire fight, Brooke hesitated. It wasn't mercy. It was something smaller, fatigue mixed with the weight of too many kills. The kind that pressed on your chest when adrenaline faded. Then she remembered the rules drilled into her since training. If they can shoot, they're a threat. If they can move, they can call reinforcements. She exhaled, adjusted wind, and squeezed. 1 round, the man dropped. The second turned to run, another shot. The third crawled 2 meters before stopping. She watched for several seconds, expression unreadable. Then she lowered the rifle. South clear, she said, her tone even again. Ward didn't reply. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant when her voice went that flat. Minutes passed before anyone moved again. Finally, Cho stood. Viper flights circling back. Extraction birds en route, 20 minutes. Copy, Ward said. Everyone prep for exfil, lighten your load, leave nothing sensitive behind. The team began packing. Equipment, casing, batteries, anything with intel, all gathered and burned in a small, controlled fire. The flames flickered orange across tired faces. Brooke stayed on overwatch until the last second. Even when the helicopter blades finally appeared as distant silhouettes against the moonlight, she didn't lower her weapon. The extraction bird hovered 200 meters from the compound, kicking up clouds of ash and dust. Ward motioned for everyone to move. One by one, they climbed aboard. Brooke was last. Before stepping off the perch, she looked back at the valley, the smoke, the ruins, the silence. It looked peaceful from this angle, almost beautiful. That was the cruel part. She whispered to herself, so softly the wind might have stolen it. 40 minutes. That's how long the fight had lasted. 40 minutes that had felt like a lifetime. Inside the helicopter, the roar of rotors filled everything. Ramirez slumped in his seat, helmet tilted back, eyes closed. Cho typed furiously on his tablet, already logging coordinates and transmissions. Jenna leaned against Cross, checking his bandage one more time. Ward sat opposite Brooke, hands clasped, elbows on knees. He watched her for a while before speaking. "You saved the team tonight." Brooke shook her head. "We all did." "No," he said quietly. "We fought, you saved. Don't confuse the two." She didn't argue. She just looked out the open side door at the valley below, now distant, fading under darkness. Ward leaned closer. "You all right?" She gave a small, tired smile. "Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When the helicopter touched down at Fort Kestrel, dawn was just breaking, thin lines of pink light cutting through gray cloud. The base felt sterile after the valley, too bright, too clean. Soldiers moved around them, routine and efficient, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Brooke, every step felt heavier. The moment she removed her rifle sling, her hands began to tremble, the tremor that always came after holding everything together for too long. Ward noticed but said nothing. They debriefed within the hour, 6 soldiers in a concrete room facing a semicircle of intelligence officers. Questions came fast, sharp, endless. Timeline of contact. How many confirmed hostiles? What was the enemy composition? Describe the engagement duration. Ward answered first, then Cho. Ramirez filled in details from his sector. Brooke spoke last, her voice calm but distant. Approximate engagement 40 minutes. Initial estimate 60 hostiles. Later confirmed over 70. Sniper overwatch neutralized 47. There was a pause, even the officers blinked. One leaned forward. 47. "Yes, sir," she said simply. The pen in the man's hand stilled. He looked at Ward, then back at her. "Single shooter." "Single shooter," Ward confirmed. More questions followed, more data recorded, but Brooke's mind had already drifted. Back to the valley, back to the tree line, to the brief hesitation before her final shots. When the debrief ended, the officers left one by one. Ward lingered by the door. "Get some rest," he told her. She nodded but didn't move. When she finally stood, she didn't go to her quarters. She went outside instead, walking across the tarmac until she reached the fence line overlooking the desert beyond. The sun had risen higher now, harsh, unforgiving light washing over everything. The same kind of light that exposed more than it healed. She watched the horizon, arms folded, eyes unfocused. She thought about the valley, about the smoke still curling above it somewhere far away, about how 60 men had believed they could win because of numbers, and how, one by one, she'd taken that belief apart. It should have felt like triumph, but it didn't. It felt necessary, nothing more. Cole Ramirez found her there an hour later, coffee in hand. "You look like you didn't even blink." She gave a half smile. "Didn't feel like I could." He nodded, leaning against the fence beside her. "Ward says they're putting in for a commendation." Brooke's brow furrowed. "For what?" "For being the reason we're not 6 names on a memorial wall." She didn't answer right away. "I just did my job." Ramirez sipped his coffee, watching her. "That's what we all say, but not everyone means it like you do." He handed her the mug. She took it, wrapping both hands around it just to feel something warm that wasn't gunmetal or blood. "Cole," she asked quietly, eyes on the horizon, "you ever wonder what it costs, the thing we do?" He was silent for a long time. When he finally answered, his voice was low. "Every day. But if you stop doing it, who pays instead?" She nodded slowly. It wasn't comfort, but it was truth. A light wind swept across the base, carrying faint echoes of rotor blades from the flight line. The sound almost made her flinch. In that moment, Brooke realized something she'd never put into words: the difference between surviving and living. Survival was instinct, automatic. You did what you had to, without thought, without pause. Living required reflection, and reflection meant facing what you'd done to survive. She turned the thought over in her mind, watching the desert blur in morning heat. Sometimes, she thought, survival wasn't victory, it was debt. That night she didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the tree line, the muzzle flashes, the faces through the scope, the stillness that followed. She woke 3 times before dawn, heart hammering, body remembering what the mind tried to forget. When morning came again, she stood by her bunk, uniform half-buttoned, staring at her hands. They didn't shake anymore. They looked steady, capable, like they always did. But she knew better now. Because hands that never trembled could still carry weight. And Brooke Vance carried 47 ghosts. What do metals weigh, really? Not the metal, but the silence they hang from. 3 days after Revenger Valley, Brooke sat in the debriefing wing of Fort Kestrel, a room that smelled of paper, dust, and stale coffee. The walls were lined with photographs of operations no one outside the base would ever know. Men shaking hands, units posing in deserts, jungles, snow. None of them captured what happened between those frames. She sat alone, waiting for another round of questioning, another retelling of numbers and distances, of decisions made in seconds that lasted forever. The officer across from her, gray-haired, clean uniform, polite eyes, leaned forward. "Petty Officer Vance, do you understand what your actions achieved?" Brooke kept her gaze on the tabletop. "We survived, sir." "You did more than survive. You held an impossible position against overwhelming odds. You neutralized nearly 50 hostiles. That's not survival. That's extraordinary execution under pressure." She said nothing. The word extraordinary sounded wrong in her ears. Nothing about that valley had felt extraordinary. It had felt inevitable. You shoot or you die. You aim or you lose the people beside you. The officer went on, voice smooth, practiced. "Command is preparing a formal recommendation for the Silver Valor Cross. You'll be briefed by public affairs before the announcement." Brooke blinked once. The words barely landed. "A medal." "Yes, you've earned it." Earned, another word that didn't fit. She gave a faint nod, because it was easier than explaining the truth. That awards never changed what she saw when she closed her eyes. The meeting ended with a handshake she barely felt. Outside, the sun burned bright across the tarmac. The sound of drills carried from the shooting range, the rhythmic pop of controlled fire. Everything on base kept moving. Business as usual. But Brooke felt disconnected, like the world around her was running on a slightly different time. Every laugh in the mess hall, every passing voice, sounded like it came from a place she no longer belonged to. That night she sat in her quarters, rifle case open on the cot beside her. The MK-13 lay inside, spotless, cleaned, perfect, as if the battle had never happened. She ran a thumb along the cold steel, tracing the engraved serial number. Every weapon was identical, but for her, this one was personal, not because of what it could do, but because of what it had already done. She closed the case slowly, locked it, then sat in the dark for a long time. The ceremony was set for the following week. It was small, quiet, contained within the base auditorium. No cameras, no press, no uniforms polished for show. Just officers, fellow SEALs, and the kind of silence that came with classified recognition. Brooke stood in dress blues, posture perfect, expression unreadable. Commander Ward was there, standing just off to the side. Ramirez and Cho were in the second row, their faces a mix of pride and something softer, something they couldn't say out loud. The citation was read aloud by a senior officer, voice steady, reverent. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy force, Petty Officer Brooke, Vance's exceptional marksmanship, tactical judgment, and unwavering courage under intense fire directly prevented her team's position from being overrun by numerically superior hostile forces. The words washed over her like rain she couldn't feel. She heard them, but they didn't belong to her. When the medal was pinned to her chest, she stared straight ahead. The applause that followed was soft, respectful, distant. She saluted. The officer saluted back. Protocol complete. Afterward, people approached her in ones and twos, quiet congratulations, firm handshakes, brief smiles. The kind you give someone who's done something remarkable but you'll never truly understand. Ramirez clapped her shoulder. You did good, sniper. Brooke managed a faint smile. We all did. He shook his head. Not like you did. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Ward stepped closer. They'll want to interview you eventually. Official channels. You don't have to accept if you don't want to. She looked at him. What would I say? That's up to you. He studied her face for a moment, the exhaustion behind her calm. You held when no one else could, but holding comes with a price. Make sure you pay it slow. That was the closest he came to telling her he understood. Later, alone in her room again, Brooke placed the medal on her desk. It gleamed under the single lamp, small, perfect, meaningless. She thought about the valley, about the smell of smoke, about the sound her rifle made when the last shot left the chamber, about how she hadn't blinked for almost an hour. Was that courage, or was it something colder, instinct hollowed out until nothing human was left? She picked up the medal, turned it over in her palm. The inscription was neat, machine-stamped. Valor, courage, duty. She whispered the words once, then again softer, and realized they didn't sound like her anymore. 2 weeks later, command cleared the team for extended leave. Most SEALs would have spent that time drinking, disappearing into cities, chasing noise to drown out the quiet. Brooke went the other direction. She drove north alone, past the base perimeter, past the desert, past the last checkpoint, until the road turned into gravel and the signal bars vanished. There was a lake she used to visit before deployment, remote, silent, framed by pine and fog, the kind of place where no one asked questions. She parked by the water and sat on the hood of her truck, watching ripples move across the surface. Her reflection stared back, ghost-like, eyes darker than she remembered. For the first time in weeks, she felt air that wasn't filled with gunpowder. It should have been peaceful, but peace doesn't come when you're still fighting inside. She closed her eyes. The images came back, the tree line, the muzzle flashes, the sound of metal fragments hitting stone. She tried to slow her breathing, but every inhale carried the echo of rifle fire. She pressed her palms against the hood, grounding herself. The metal was warm from the sun, real, solid. She opened her eyes again and stared at the water. 40 minutes, she whispered. 40 minutes and I'll live with it forever. A bird called somewhere across the lake. The sound startled her more than it should have. She laughed once, dry and short. Guess I'm jumpy now. The truth was simpler. She wasn't jumpy. She was awake, fully awake in a world that suddenly felt too fragile. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine. She looked down at her hands, steady, capable, unshaken, and realized something that hit harder than any firefight. She didn't miss the battle, but she missed who she was before it. Before the quiet had turned into a weight. Before every reflection reminded her of the one she'd ended. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the medal. It caught the light again, perfect, polished, untarnished. For a moment she thought about throwing it into the lake, just to see if it would sink. But she didn't. She set it on the hood beside her instead. Because even if she didn't believe in what it represented, others did. And sometimes that had to be enough. When she returned to Fort Kestrel a week later, she found Ramirez waiting at the hangar. He grinned when he saw her. "You look like you've been living in a postcard." "Something like that," she said. He gestured to a crate beside him. "We're heading to the range. Commander Ward wants us to requal. You coming?" She hesitated, then nodded. Minutes later, she stood on the firing line, ear protection in place, rifle in hand. The target was 800 meters out, a white silhouette against the sand. She settled into prone, breathing through the old rhythm. Inhale, exhale, pause. The shot broke clean, the target dropped. Ramirez whistled, "Still got it." Brooke didn't answer, she didn't need to. Because the truth was she'd never lost it. The skill was muscle, memory, instinct. What she'd lost was everything that used to come with it, the certainty, the pride, the clean sense of purpose. Ward walked past, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking between scores. "Good shooting, Vance." "Thank you, sir." He studied her for a moment. "You still thinking about Revenger?" She gave a half-smile. "Only when I breathe." He nodded once, the faintest glint of understanding in his eyes. "That's the curse of doing your job too well." Brooke looked downrange again. The target was gone, replaced by silence and sand. She felt the sun on her face, the faint vibration of the earth under her elbows. Ward started to walk away, then paused. "You know what people will remember years from now?" "What?" "That when everything fell apart, one person didn't. And because of that, 6 came home." Brooke watched him leave. She wanted to believe it, but belief was harder now. She packed up her rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and walked back toward the hangar. The metal sat in her pocket, heavy and quiet, not pride, not regret, something in between. As she passed the line of aircraft shimmering in the heat, she looked up at the clear blue sky, endless, unforgiving. Somewhere above those clouds, there were still missions, still teams, still valleys waiting to test someone else's silence. And Brooke Vance knew one thing for certain: medals fade, headlines disappear, but moments like Revenger never leave you. Because sometimes courage isn't about running toward fire. Sometimes it's standing in it, and living long enough to feel what it costs. How do you return to war when part of you never left it? For Brooke Vance, the orders came quietly. A sealed folder slid across a briefing table 6 weeks after Revenger. No fanfare, no questions, just a line of text stamped in red: operational recall, immediate. Commander Ward didn't look surprised when she entered the room. "Didn't take them long," he said. Brooke glanced at the papers, then back at him. Another mission. Different AO, similar objectives, small footprint. How small? 4 operators, 1 sniper. He didn't have to say it. She already knew who that sniper was. There was a beat of silence between them, not awkward, just heavy. The kind of pause that holds more truth than any briefing. "You can decline," Ward said quietly. "You've earned the right." Brooke looked down at the folder again. The ink felt colder than the metal tables they sat at. Would it matter? "Maybe not to them," he said, "but it would to you." She didn't answer right away. She just thought about the valley, the smoke, the faces she still saw at night. Thought about how the metal on her desk caught morning light like it was mocking her. Finally she said, "When do we leave?" The new operation was in a region no less remote, cliffs and canyons stretching like scars across the earth. The objective was simple on paper: locate and extract a downed UAV component before local militia forces could recover it. The kind of mission that would vanish into classified logs whether it succeeded or failed. But for Brooke, it wasn't about orders. It was about proving to herself that she could still function, that the valley hadn't broken her, just bent her. The new team was smaller, tighter, almost surgical in composition. Ward led again. Ramirez was there too, because he'd never let anyone go back into fire without him. Two new faces rounded out the roster: Specialist Mason Drew, young, eager, all sharp edges and bravado, and Lieutenant Sarah Keene, intelligence liaison and combat medic, handpicked for her ability to read terrain and people with equal accuracy. Their transport hummed low as it sliced through the dawn. The world below looked peaceful from altitude, distant mountains brushing clouds, the land painted in colors that lied. Keene broke the silence first. "You're Brooke Vance, right? The Revenger sniper." Brooke looked up slowly. "I'm the one who made it home." Keene smiled faintly. "They say you held off 60 men." "They say a lot of things," Brooke said. "Most of them sound better when you weren't there." Ramirez chuckled quietly. "You'll learn quick, Lieutenant. If Brooke doesn't correct a story, it's because the truth hurts worse." Ward cut in from the cockpit. "Focus up, we're 20 minutes out." Brooke checked her rifle. Same model, same scope, same feel. The sound of the bolt sliding forward sent a shiver down her spine, not fear, not excitement, something colder: memory. They inserted before sunrise, low altitude, fast rope into a canyon that swallowed sound. The air was thin, metallic. Wind funneled through the cliffs like whispers. Cho wasn't with them this time, which meant Brooke had to monitor comms herself. She set up the link, adjusted frequencies, scanned the horizon. The terrain was brutal, jagged rock, scattered brush, narrow visibility. Perfect for concealment, terrible for extraction. Ward spread the team into a diamond formation. Retrieve, record, and exfil, where ghosts in and out. For hours, everything went as planned. They found the wreckage wedged between two ridgelines, half buried in shale. Mason and Ramirez worked on recovery while Keene secured samples for intel. Brooke took overwatch from a nearby cliff, her rifle balanced across a flat slab of stone. Through her scope, the valley was still. No movement, no heat signatures, only the steady pulse of the wind. For the first time since Revenger, she almost felt normal. But normal didn't last. It never did. At 14:20 hours, Mason's voice broke through the net. "Command, this is Echo 2. We've got company." Brooke froze. "Define company." He adjusted his scope. 5 no, 7 tangos, ridge west, moving deliberate. Ward was calm. "Copy, defensive posture, Brooke." "Visual," she said, adjusting her sight. Through her glass, she caught movement, figures cresting the western ridge, weapons slung, scanning. Not random patrols, hunters. She switched frequencies. "Looks like they tracked the drone, not us, but if they spot gear." "They will," Ward finished. Ramirez clicked his safety off. "We engaging or ghosting?" Ward hesitated, the kind of hesitation that decides fates. "If we ghost, they follow. If we hit first, they scatter. Brooke." Her pulse slowed. "We hit first." Ward nodded. "You heard her, make it clean." Brooke exhaled once, centered the first target, crosshairs steady. 640 meters, slight left wind, one breath, one squeeze. Impact. The man dropped before the echo reached them. "Contact," someone shouted in the distance. The others scattered, too late. Brooke fired again, second man down, then a third. Mason opened fire with controlled bursts. Keene ducked behind a boulder, calling out range corrections. Ramirez flanked left, throwing smoke. The firefight was short, violent, efficient. Within minutes, the ridge fell silent again. "Status?" Ward asked. 7 down, Brooke replied. "No survivors." But something in her tone gave him pause. "You all right up there?" She lowered the rifle slowly. "Yeah," she said. "Just thought it'd feel different." Ward didn't press. He knew what she meant. They secured the wreckage and exfiltrated by late afternoon. On paper, it was flawless. No casualties, objective recovered, zero trace left behind. But the ride back was quiet. The kind of quiet where everyone's pretending not to think. Mason broke first. "You ever wonder why it's always the same? Same fight, different coordinates." Ramirez chuckled dryly. That's the job, rookie. Yeah, but we keep winning these little fights and nothing changes. Brooke looked out the window. The horizon stretched endless, indifferent. Because the fight isn't about change, she said. It's about endurance. Mason frowned. That's depressing. It's honest, she said. Keene watched her carefully. You really don't believe in what we do anymore, do you? Brooke turned her head slowly. I believe in the people beside me. That's enough. The conversation died there. Back at base, the after-action report read like a success story. Objective secured. Hostiles neutralized. No friendly losses. Ward submitted it without fanfare. Ramirez hit the gym. Mason bragged to anyone who'd listen. Keene filed intel reports with surgical precision. Brooke stayed in the armory, cleaning her rifle long after everyone else had gone. When she finally left, the sky outside had turned purple with dusk. The air smelled of fuel and rain. She walked toward the firing range, but stopped halfway. Something about the sound of echoing shots in the distance made her chest tighten. She leaned against a railing, eyes on the far-off ridges. That's when Keene found her. You skipped the afterbrief. Brooke nodded, didn't feel like talking. Keene stepped beside her, silent for a moment. I read your file, she said softly. Revenger wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. Brooke's jaw tightened. Nothing ever is. They say you saved your team. I kept them alive. That's not the same thing. Keene studied her. You don't think what you did was heroic? Brooke let out a slow breath. Heroic is what people call survival when they need it to mean something. The younger woman looked away. So why keep going back? Brooke didn't answer right away. She looked out at the dark horizon where the earth met the sky like an old wound. Because if I stop, I'll have to remember. Out there, it's loud enough to forget. They stood there in silence, the wind tugging at their sleeves. Keene finally said, You ever think about getting out? Brooke smiled faintly. Every day, and every day I don't. A week later, new orders came in. Another operation, another flight. Ward handed her the folder himself. You sure you're up for it? Up for what, she asked. Doing my job. He met her eyes, doing it again. She hesitated, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew exactly what again meant. It meant new ghosts, new memories, the same silence waiting at the end. But she nodded anyway. Yeah, I'm up for it. Ward sighed softly. You remind me of someone I used to serve with, he said. He once told me there's two kinds of soldiers, the ones who fight because they believe, and the ones who fight because they can't stop. Which one was he, she asked. He was the second, until it killed him. Brooke looked down at the folder. Then maybe I should try being the first. Ward smiled faintly. Maybe you should. That night, Brooke sat alone outside her quarters, listening to the hum of generators and distant footsteps. The base felt alive in a way she couldn't anymore. She reached into her pocket and took out the metal. It caught the moonlight, same as before, small, precise, heavy. She turned it over in her hand, thumb brushing the inscription until the metal warmed under her skin. Then she set it down on the bench beside her and whispered, almost like an oath. If courage means going back, then let it mean something this time. The wind rose, carrying the faint smell of sand and engine oil. Somewhere far off, a helicopter took off, the same sound that had started every chapter of her life. Brooke looked toward the noise, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable. For a long time, she'd thought survival was the point, that living meant winning. But now she understood the truth that Revenger had written in her bones. Survival was just the beginning. What came after that was the real war. What happens when the mission isn't just out there anymore, but inside you? The new op was codenamed Silent Ember, reconnaissance and sabotage deep inside the Corrid frontier. Officially, it was about intercepting weapon shipments. Unofficially, it was about sending a message. For Brooke, it was just another valley, another place that looked too much like Revenger. She stood by the hangar doors the morning of departure, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes fixed on the horizon. The same wind, the same pale sun rising over stone and dust. Ramirez walked up beside her, yawning. "You sure you want to do this again?" She smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be here if I didn't." He raised an eyebrow. "You always say that like you're trying to convince someone." "Maybe I am." Ward appeared next, clipboard in hand, tone brisk. "All right, people, wheels up in 5. Target zone's a border village being used as a logistics hub. We're inserting at night, planting charges on their ammo convoys exfil before dawn." Brooke nodded. "Same drill." "Same rules," he said. "If it moves and it's armed, you know what to do." She did too well. Night fell hard over the desert. The helicopter's lights were cut 15 clicks out, plunging the team into a black so pure it felt like water. The only color came from the faint glow of the instrument panel and the distant scatter of stars. When they touched down, the sand swallowed their footprints. They moved fast, low, silent, their silhouettes dissolving into terrain. Brooke stayed rear guard, eyes sweeping through her night scope. Every sound mattered: wind against rock, the scrape of gear, the distant bark of a dog somewhere in the village below. It was supposed to be routine. But the routine never lasted. Halfway through the infiltration, Keen's voice crackled over comms. "Movement, 12 o'clock. Small patrol, 2 men, maybe 3. Brooke froze, dropped to prone, sighted through the optic. Sure enough, 2 figures walking the ridge, rifles slung, flashlights dimmed. "Engage," Keen whispered. Ward hesitated. "If they get closer, yes. Otherwise let them pass." They didn't pass. The patrol stopped 50 meters away, kneeling by something on the ground, footprints. Their footprints. Brooke's heartbeat slowed to that sniper rhythm. 1 beat, 1 breath, 1 decision. "They've seen the tracks," she said softly. "They'll call it in." "Take them," Ward ordered. Her first shot was clean. The second broke through echoing stone. The third never came. The second man had already fallen. But sound travels faster than orders. The shot bounced through the canyon like thunder, and somewhere in the village below, lights flared to life. "Contact," Ramirez barked. "We're blown." "Fall back to secondary route," Ward commanded. Brooke moved fast, packing gear, eyes darting between shadows. Gunfire erupted from below, tracer rounds slicing the darkness. "Mason, you're on point," Ward shouted. "Got it," Mason replied, sprinting ahead. They descended the ridge under fire, bullets sparking off rock. Brooke covered the rear, methodical even in chaos. She fired once, twice, each round finding a mark in the dark. But the enemy was closer now, organized, fast. These weren't random guards. This was a trained cell, ready for intrusion. "North slope," Keen yelled. "We're surrounded." Ward swore under his breath. "Ramirez, smoke out that ridge. Vance, find us a hole." Brooke scanned the terrain, searching for any break, a slope, a path, anything. Then she saw it, a narrow gorge cutting east, half covered by fallen rock. "There," she said, 80 meters east downhill. Cover fire, move now." They sprinted. Gunfire raked the sand behind them. Keen stumbled once. Ramirez caught her arm. Mason turned to fire, slipped, cursed, and kept moving. They reached the gorge breathless, sliding behind rock cover. For a brief second, silence returned, jagged and shallow. Ward crouched low, catching his breath. "Status." "All accounted for," Ramirez said, checking quickly. "Ammo." "Low," Brooke answered. Ward peered through the darkness. "They'll box us in if we stay." Brooke looked up the narrow gorge, gauging angles. "I can hold them for a minute, maybe 2. He shook his head. "You're not staying behind." "It's not staying," she said quietly. "It's buying time." Their eyes met. The same silent argument they'd had before, the one where she always won. Ward exhaled. 1 minute, then you move. Brooke climbed higher, finding a natural shelf. She set up her rifle, chambered a round, and watched through her scope. The first wave appeared seconds later, 5, then 7 figures moving through the canyon mouth, rifles up, confident. She waited until they were clustered, then fired. The first man dropped instantly. The rest scrambled for cover, yelling. Another peeked. She fired again. Another fell. Her breathing stayed slow, methodical, detached. Below, Ward's voice came through faint. 30 seconds, Vance. She ignored the countdown. Another target appeared, another shot. Then something changed. Through her scope, she saw one of the militants not running for cover. He was dragging someone smaller, maybe 14, maybe younger, out from behind a crate. A local boy, terrified, barefoot, crying. The man was using him as a shield. Brooke froze. Ward's voice came again, sharper. Vance, pull back. But she didn't move. The man was shouting now, using the boy as leverage, screaming in another language. Through the scope, she could see his mouth moving, his weapon pressed against the kid's shoulder. If she took the shot, she might save her team. If she missed, she'd kill a child. Her finger hovered over the trigger. The world narrowed, time slowed. She could hear her breath echoing inside her skull. 1 heartbeat, 2. And then she didn't fire. She couldn't. Ward's voice cut through static. Brooke, we're moving now, fall back. The spell broke. She grabbed her rifle, slung it, and ran, heart hammering now for the first time in years. They made it out through the gorge, looping east, then north, until the gunfire faded behind them. Extraction arrived 40 minutes later. The team climbed aboard, exhausted, coated in dust and silence. Ward sat across from her, watching. You hesitated. She didn't deny it. Yeah. Why? Because I saw his face. Ramirez looked between them, confused. Whose? The kid, she said softly. He was just a kid. Ward exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his eyes. You made the right call. Did I? She asked. Because I didn't take the shot. You did what your conscience told you. That's the call that separates soldiers from machines. But Brooke wasn't sure that was true. Because machines didn't dream. And she knew she would dream of that moment again and again, the face in her scope, the decision that split her in two. Back at base, the mission was labeled partial success. The convoy was lost, but the drone intel recovered. Officially, no failures. Unofficially, something had changed. Brooke spent the next days in silence, barely eating, barely speaking. Ward checked on her once. She said she was fine. He didn't believe her. One evening, she found herself at the range again, rifle lined up, finger resting on the trigger, but she didn't fire. The target stood untouched, white and waiting. She lowered the rifle, staring at her hands. They didn't shake, they just felt heavy. Keen approached from behind. You missed dinner. Wasn't hungry. You haven't been hungry in days. Maybe that's because I'm still full, Brooke said bitterly. Full of ghosts. Keen said nothing, just stood beside her. Finally, Brooke spoke again. You ever wonder how many decisions we get before we stop being ourselves? Keen frowned. What do you mean? Every mission, every trigger pull, it takes something. And eventually, you run out of something to give. Keen nodded slowly. And then what? Brooke's voice dropped to a whisper. Then you keep doing it anyway. The two women stood in the dim light, the wind brushing dust across the empty range. Brooke picked up her rifle case and closed it quietly. As she walked away, her reflection passed across the glass door, the faint shimmer of a woman who looked whole but wasn't. That night she dreamed again, not of battle, not of blood, but of the boy's face in her scope, the moment she didn't pull the trigger. And for the first time, she woke up crying. Not because of guilt, but because mercy had finally found her. When the gun finally goes quiet, what's left to listen to? For Brooke Vance, It wasn't the silence that frightened her anymore. It was the echo of the shot she didn't take. Days bled together after the mission. Reports filed, debriefs done. The words partial success stamped across another piece of paper that meant nothing. But inside, something had shifted. Not broken, just bent toward something unfamiliar. The others noticed it first. Ramirez stopped cracking jokes around her. Ward stopped giving her the long assignments. Even the younger operators who once whispered her name like legend lowered their voices when she passed. Respect had turned to distance. And Brooke let it. She spent her mornings at the edge of the base, sitting on a low wall that overlooked miles of dust. From there, the horizon looked endless, a place that promised escape but never offered directions. Some nights, she'd hear aircraft leaving for other operations, the low rumble of engines fading into the dark. She'd watch the lights disappear and wonder if the men inside felt what she did, that quiet, terrible envy of anyone who still believed the mission was simple. Ward found her there one afternoon, sleeves rolled up, a file folder in his hand. "Still staring at nothing?" he asked lightly. "Still bringing paperwork to ruin it," she replied. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're due for psych eval." Brooke smirked again. "Regulation," he said. "You know the drill." She didn't move. "And if I say I'm fine?" "Then you're lying," he said quietly. That stung more than she expected. Ward sat beside her on the wall. For a while, neither spoke. The wind carried grit across their boots. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a training explosion rumbled. Finally, he said, "You hesitated out there. Everyone would have understood if you didn't." She looked at him sharply. "Would you have?" He hesitated. "Maybe not before Revenger, but now, yeah, I think I would." They sat in the long silence that followed. Then Ward handed her the folder. "Command wants to send you stateside for evaluation and instruction duty. You've got more combat hours than half the division. You could train the next generation." Brooke took the folder but didn't open it. "You're benching me." "I'm giving you a choice." She turned the folder in her hands. "And if I say no?" "Then you stay here," he said, "and keep fighting until there's nothing left to save." The words landed heavier than any order. When he walked away, she opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet. Instructor transfer, Fort Raven, Advanced Sniper Program. She read it twice, then closed it again. That night, Brooke didn't sleep. She sat on her bunk, hands clasped, watching moonlight creep across the floor. She remembered every valley, every ridge, every pull of the trigger. The weight of the rifle, the burn of adrenaline, the strange calm that came with knowing she controlled who lived and who didn't. And she thought about the boy, the one she hadn't killed. She wondered where he was now, if he even remembered her, if he'd told anyone about the American sniper who aimed and chose not to fire. Maybe he was just another ghost, like the one she carried. Or maybe he was proof that mercy still meant something. At 300 she stood, grabbed her duffel and walked out. Fort Raven sat on the coast, gray buildings against gray sea, a place built for precision and nothing else. The first morning she arrived, the smell of salt and gun oil hit her like memory. The range stretched for miles, targets disappearing into fog. Rows of trainees waited in line, rifles gleaming under cloudlight. Their uniforms were too new, their faces too clean. An instructor approached her, Captain Eli Harris, tall, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who had lived his life by the book. "You're Vance," he said, "the Revenger sniper." Brooke nodded once. "That's what they call me." "You'll be running advanced ballistics and field decision modules. They want realism. You can give it." Realism. That was a word that tasted like smoke. She started teaching the next day. The first week was mechanical. She taught breathing, trigger discipline, the difference between patience and hesitation. but her students watched her with the same look everyone did, a mix of awe and discomfort. She was the story they'd all heard but never believed. One afternoon, during a break, a young recruit named Miller approached. "Ma'am." She looked up from her notes. "Yeah. Can I ask something?" "Ask." "What does it feel like, taking the shot?" Brooke studied him. He couldn't have been more than 20. The question wasn't bravado, it was curiosity. She thought about lying, then didn't. "It feels like control," she said softly, "until it doesn't." He frowned. "I don't get it." "You will," she said, "if you're unlucky." Weeks passed. She started running live scenario drills, simulated urban overwatch, moral stress tests, situations designed to make them think before firing. But the command didn't like her methods. Harris pulled her aside after a session. "You're overcomplicating it, Vance. These are soldiers, not philosophers." "They're humans first," she said. "They should learn what it costs before they pay it." "That's not your call." She stepped closer. "Then whose is it?" "Theirs, when they're standing in a valley counting targets instead of people." He didn't answer. After that, word spread through the camp. Vance wasn't just training shooters. She was training conscience. Some loved her for it, some didn't. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ocean, she stayed on the range after everyone left. She set up a single target at 800 meters. Not paper, a mirror panel someone had discarded. When she looked through her scope, she saw herself. The reticle rested right between her own eyes. She held her breath. Inhale. Exhale. Half breaths. Then she stopped, finger frozen. Because for the first time, she understood what she'd been running from. It wasn't death, it was recognition. The realization that every shot she'd ever taken was a reflection. Each target another version of herself, stripped of mercy, stripped of choice. She lowered the rifle and let the silence settle. The sea wind howled across the range, sharp and cold. It carried a whisper that wasn't quite words but felt like truth. "You're not here to shoot anymore. You're here to teach them how not to become you." Months passed. Brooke became a myth again, but a different kind. Not the perfect sniper who never missed, but the instructor who refused to let her students lose their humanity. Some nights she still dreamed of Revenger. But the faces grew fewer. The boy's face stayed. And somehow it no longer haunted her, it reminded her. One morning she found a letter on her bunk. No sender, just official seal. Reactivation request, frontline advisor position, immediate. She stared at it for a long time. Ward's name was listed as commanding officer. She smiled faintly. Of course. She could almost hear his voice, steady, measured. "You've got a choice, Vance." And she did. She folded the letter, slid it into her pocket, and walked out toward the sea. The sky was gray, the waves relentless. She watched them crash and pull back, over and over, the rhythm of the world refusing to end. For years she'd measured time in trigger pulls. Now she measured it in breaths. She thought about Ward, about Ramirez, about Keene, about the boy. And she wondered, was courage the act of going back, or the act of finally stopping? The ocean didn't answer. It never does. She turned away from the water, metal glinting faintly in her pocket. Somewhere behind her, trainees shouted on the range, young voices, unscarred, still believing. Brooke smiled. For the first time in years, it wasn't sad. Because maybe that was the point of surviving, not to keep fighting, but to make sure someone else never had to. That night before lights out, she wrote one line in her journal, the first she'd written since the war. Sometimes strength isn't holding the line, it's knowing when to lay your rifle down. She closed the notebook, set it beside the metal, and exhaled. Outside, the sea kept its rhythm, unbothered by memory or regret. Brooke Vance, the sniper who once counted lives by distance, now counted them by mercy. and though the world would never know her story, she was finally learning how to live it. How do you know when a war is truly over? When the enemy stops firing, or when you stop remembering? For Brooke Vance, the war never ended with a bullet. It ended with silence, the kind that felt heavy and holy at the same time. Months passed after the letter. She didn't respond, didn't need to. Instead, she kept teaching. Each day, she walked the line of trainees at Fort Raven, adjusting scopes, correcting posture, teaching not just aim but restraint. Her voice had softened, her steps slower, her eyes somehow clearer. The new recruits didn't know her story beyond whispers. They didn't need to. They just knew that when Brooke spoke, people listened. Because every word sounded like it had been bought with something irreplaceable. It was late autumn when Ward arrived. No warning, no orders, just a convoy rolling through the fog, boots crunching on gravel, and then his familiar voice saying her name. Vance. She turned. Time had changed him, silver hair at the temples, deeper lines around his eyes, but the steadiness was still there. I thought you were still overseas, she said. I was, he replied, until I was. They stood there for a moment, the sea wind whipping across the range. Ward finally smiled. You didn't answer my letter. I didn't need to, she said. You already knew the answer. He nodded slowly. You made the right choice. Did I? She asked. He looked at her long and hard. You found peace. I'd call that right. She didn't answer, just turned toward the horizon, where the ocean met the clouds like a blurred memory. You still keep count? He asked quietly. Her eyes flickered. Of what? The ones you saved. She hesitated. No, I only count the ones I almost lost. They walked the perimeter together, no destination in mind. Ward told her stories from the field, small victories, losses that never made the news. Brooke listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, You still believe in it, the fight? He took his time before answering. I believe in what it can protect, not what it destroys. She nodded. That used to be enough for me too. He looked at her almost proud. You've changed. Maybe, she said softly, or maybe I just stopped mistaking noise for purpose. That evening, Fort Raven held a training demonstration for senior command live fire, moving targets, precision drills. Brooke coordinated from the observation deck while her trainees lined up below. Wind speeds high, visibility low. It was the kind of test she used to live for. Halfway through, one of the younger snipers, Miller, misjudged his wind call. The shot went wide, clipping the target stand instead of center mass. Embarrassed, he cursed, slamming his hand against the rifle. Brooke descended the stairs and walked over, her expression calm. You angry at the rifle or yourself? She asked. He looked up startled. I knew the shot, I felt it. She crouched beside him. Then what happened? He shook his head. I don't know, I hesitated. Maybe I overthought it. Brooke smiled faintly. Good, that means you're human. He frowned, but I missed. She leaned closer, voice low. One day, you'll learn the difference between missing a shot and saving one. For a moment, he didn't understand. Then his face softened. Reset, she said. Breathe, forget the miss. Trust the next round. He nodded, exhaled, adjusted. The next shot struck dead center. Brooke rose slowly, her voice steady but quiet enough that only he heard. Precision isn't perfection, Miller. It's mercy that never forgets how to aim. That night after the demonstration, Ward found her sitting on the same wall she used to haunt years ago, staring at the horizon, her rifle case beside her, unopened. He joined her without speaking. For a while, there was only the sound of waves and the slow hum of base lights. Then he said, You've done something here, something bigger than any mission. Brooke looked at him, her face illuminated by the fading sunset. I didn't do it for medals. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." They sat in silence a while longer. Then Ward reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope, yellowed, official. "What's this?" It came through channels. Local aid workers found a boy in the Corrid frontier. Said he mentioned an American woman with a rifle who didn't kill him. He drew this. Brooke opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a child's sketch. Rough lines done in pencil, a hill, a rifle, a small figure standing beside someone larger, both outlined in the same light. At the bottom, one word scrawled in another language, Shukriya. "Thank you." Brooke's hands trembled. For a long time she couldn't speak. Finally she whispered, "He's alive." Ward nodded, "Seems so." Brooke stared at the drawing again. It wasn't detailed, not really, but it was enough. Enough to make every ghost quieter. Tears stung her eyes, but they didn't fall. They stayed where they belonged, right behind the strength that had held too long. Ward stood. "I'll leave you to it." "Stay," she said softly, "please." He sat back down, and together they watched the ocean burn orange under the last light of day. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, Brooke returned to the range one last time. The wind had died, the air was still. She carried the drawing in her pocket. At 800 meters, she placed a single new target, blank, white, untouched. Then she stepped back, chambered one round, and aimed. Through her scope, the world came into perfect focus. But she didn't see the target. She saw her past, every mission, every face, every breath between life and death. She whispered, "For all of them." Then she pulled the trigger. The sound echoed once and was gone. When she walked downrange, the bullet hole sat dead center. Not as a symbol of violence, but as proof of control. Proof that the same hands that once took life could still create peace. She left the target standing, the wind tugging gently at its edges. By morning, Brooke was gone. No note, no orders, no destination. Just her rifle missing from the armory, and her name crossed off the roster with a quiet line. Ward filed the report himself, voluntary discharge, no contact. He didn't search, he knew better. Some stories weren't meant to be found again. Months later, on the other side of the world, in a remote mountain village, an aid worker snapped a photo. A woman fixing a broken radio on the roof of a small school. Hair tied back, faded jacket, a familiar steadiness in her hands. No one knew her name. The villagers just called her the silent teacher. When the aid worker showed the photo to a former SEAL who'd served under Ward, he smiled and said quietly, "Yeah, that's her." The photo circulated online for a while, a woman on a roof, sunlight on her face, children laughing below. No story, no caption, just a moment caught between past and peace. And then it disappeared again. Years later, a trainee at Fort Raven asked a question during class. "Sir, is it true there was once a sniper who left without orders? A woman?" Ward, now retired, visiting the base for a lecture, paused before answering. He looked out at the sea through the window, the horizon painted gold. Then he said, "Yes, there was." The trainee frowned. "What happened to her?" Ward smiled softly. "She stopped fighting wars that weren't hers anymore." The room went silent. Ward set down his notes and added, "And in doing so, she finally won." That night, long after the base lights dimmed, the ocean roared against the cliffs, relentless, eternal. Somewhere far away, a woman sat outside a small schoolhouse, watching the stars rise over quiet land. Her hands were calloused from work, not war. Beside her, the same metal glimmered faintly in the dirt, half buried, half forgotten. She didn't need it anymore. Because peace, she'd learned, doesn't come from being unafraid of dying. It comes from learning how to live again. The stars above her flickered like distant flares. She looked up and smiled. And if you listened closely, really closely, You could almost hear her whisper into the wind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.